Still going.
Good morning.
Still
Welcome
going.
into the Morning Burrito Podcast. I am Michael,
I am Eric.
and we are here.
Still
You're back.
going with jazz.
We're
Blues.
we're trying something different. We're going to do a soft open. We just want to let you know this morning we have a action-packed, awesome show for you. We'll fill you in on where he was and what he's been doing, and
I don't even know what I've been doing.
and we'll give you a good message today. I think that will be something you enjoy. We're going to talk about value for our younger generations, the millennials and the Gen Zers.
Not values.
Well, I mean, we may touch on that a little bit, but
Maybe.
we'll be talking about how they are valued in our society, but more specifically in our churches. So I hope you're ready. Welcome into the Morning Burrito Podcast.
Boom. Yeah.
All right, so we
Wow.
are here this morning, and I'm really excited about this show. I think this is a topic that I've just had kind of rolling around in my head for several days now, and probably longer than that, but certainly in terms of the podcast, this is something I've been thinking about. And I actually have a burrito. Thank you for
You do?
bringing me.
Yeah.
You already ate yours.
Well, I
and this is even the first take. Like, this is not like
I know.
you just ate it before you got
And
here.
I did. I bought them, and I was coming, and the smell in the truck was just, it overwhelmed me. So I had no choice but to down mine, and I figured you could be silent during this episode, which you are right now. But anyway, yeah, it's been a good week. I don't know, in my life anyway, got rid of one child. Well, I shouldn't say that, sounded kind of bad, didn't it? I mean, so yeah, Graydon, he moved out this morning at 2:15 a.m.
He's probably
So,
somewhere over Montana. at
He's
the
somewhere around Bozeman probably right now. And yeah, going to go and work and live in South Dakota.
Yeah, we were just talking before in our pre-show meeting that I don't know that Graydon, your oldest boy, quite understands what he's getting into with the winter coming in South Dakota. Your son's girlfriend was letting you guys know that there was their first 35-degree frost. And as two guys that are from the Midwest, grew up in the Midwest, this is about that time. And you as soon as you walk out there in the morning and you see frost when you live in the Midwest, you know it's the beginning of the end.
It is. Hey, and this Wednesday here is fall, right? I guess it's fall everywhere, but
I mean, for us, it's kind of fall for
kind of.
us as Oregonians, but I mean, it's still going to be 80
it's
degrees
nice.
today.
It's nice. It's going to be 81.
So
Get in the boat. Go for it.
hey, it is salmon season. By
It
the way.
is, yeah. Yeah, there's guys out fishing this morning. Saw them out there all lined up just like little penguins in a row. So,
Yeah.
but
So
yeah, so pray for Mama. Mama is, she's like one
her-
down, few more to go.
it's her first birdie out of the nest.
Yeah, well,
for
officially.
good.
I mean, different than Australia.
Right.
I mean, Australia, he's coming back, but this time he's like taking everything he owns. So,
Well,
but we're happy for him.
well, we know he didn't take all of his blankets and
no, he's still
and his
he
walk,
lost some of that here, but he's gonna wish tonight he had some of that.
his
so.
snow poles and things.
Yeah.
I heard that story. So
Yeah, so he's gonna wish he had some of that. But anyway,
yeah, so let's dive into the conversation this morning. I think it would be safe to say that in many churches, that those who reside in the millennial generation, which I am like at the very leading edge of it, I would consider
You're old.
myself more of a Gen Xer than a millennial, but I mean I certainly don't have the viewpoint or life worldview of a millennial, a typical millennial. And then, of course, the Gen Z generation, which is younger generation teenagers and kids right now. So in churches, they are not always, and I would say probably more often than not given the keys to the castle, let's say, within churches. They're not valued as highly as, let's say, senior adults would value themselves, or as middle-aged people would value themselves, or even people my age would value. And so we want to explore some of the reasons for that, but let's start with this. Would you agree that millennials and Gen Zers have a outsized concern for making a difference in the world?
Yeah, they do want to make a difference. They want to make a stand. They want their voice to be heard. and they do it differently than other generations who have gone before them. So yeah, definitely they want to be heard, but it's almost a well, I guess it depends on which generation you're talking about, but almost from a selfish point of view, which is a shift. From even in my day, we want to have our voices heard, but it wasn't really from a selfish point of view; it's from a moral, ethical, spiritual point of view, and that's kind of lost.
I think one of the to keep this light for just a little bit,
Light.
I think one of the things that there's always this constant criticism of Gen Z and millennials that they are more concerned with, for instance, outward appearance than generations before. I don't know that I agree with that.
Yeah, I wouldn't agree with that because, I mean, we had all kinds of legalism in the church, right? I mean, how do you you can't keep this topic light? I mean, this is not a light topic. It's placing
no, it's funny.
Value.
I think it's funny because every generation that has come always says the generation that's after them is spoiled rotten and they only care about what they look like. They only care about their music or their, this, that, and the other. That's where I find it funny because we all do it. Every generation has done it about the generation after. I would imagine, I'm not old enough to remember this, but I would imagine the World War II generation, the greatest generation, as they've been called in our country at least, they said that about the boomers, I would guess.
Mm-hmm.
But it was really the World War II generation that said, we're going to give our kids a life that we never had. That's where that really began, was in the World War II generation.
Mm-hmm.
But when we look back, we are really spoiled rotten. Like, if you think about we're from Oregon, right? So Oregon Trail. You look back at the Oregon Trail folk, we have it better.
Yeah, lots better.
Like, we got a lot better. We don't have to worry about dysentery.
Yeah. And I think you're more spoiled than I am. So
that's probably true.
Yeah,
I get my way a lot.
you do.
But
you got a burrito and I didn't.
No, you did. It's just
I know.
here.
It is. Feels really good. Yep.
And you got your coffee, so that's good. No, so we want you to comment today as we explore and unpack this this topic. And I want to say right at the outset too, we're not saying this to say these are like broad strokes and every kid, every young adult fits into this mold, because that's not true. There are exceptions to the rule and everything. But I would say that in most of what we're going to talk about today, it's predominantly the case for most young adults and teenagers and children. And I know this because I've been in youth ministry now for over 10 years.
You're still a pup.
You were in youth ministry for nearly 30 years.
Old dog. And
we're also pastors, so we pastor people of all ages from birth to death. So, this is what we see. Now, your church may be completely different, and if your young adults and your kids and your teens are completely involved in you have great intergenerational, that's the buzzword in the church today, intergenerational ministry. If you're doing it right, hey, kudos to you, and send us a message so you can help us understand how you're doing it if you're doing it right. But I know my peers, and I would imagine your peers as senior pastors at this point, or old youth pastors because you're old. Because you probably have some friends still in youth ministry that are around your age, right?
There's a couple.
Probably not as many as for me. Although it seems like senior pastors are getting younger, but that's a different topic for a different day. But I think with my peers and your peers, they're seeing the same things that we're seeing. This is not isolated to our local context or anything like that. This is a problem the whole church has.
So I would say I would say that's true, but I would also add to that, not every pastor in every church confronts the whole, do you feel valued by your church? I don't think they ask that question.
Well, they might be scared for the answer.
I think they are. We asked that question. I asked the question. I don't know if you asked the question, but I asked the question. So,
well, I know one of the things that you and I talked about when I interviewed here is that, and we've talked about it several times since, is that I'm a big believer in students are not future leaders. And when I talk about students, I'm talking about 6th through 12th grade, because that's my wheelhouse, right? they're not future leaders. They are leaders in the church today. They can be leaders. I mean, we've even seen in our local context here at Hermnaz, there are often times where we have a lot of students in the building on a Sunday morning. The students will actually be leading the others in worship. So, you know, the students are the ones getting up, you know, when I'm not asking the church to rise. It's students who are rising. It's students who are putting their hands up, students who are clapping. And I've told them that. I'm like, you can be the leaders in the worship in our sanctuary. You can show the adults how to do it. We have student leaders who are a part of a student leadership team that are doing, you know, work to lead their peers, but also to be an example for others who are much older than them. So that's definitely the case, and we've talked about that. But again, I don't think that's the case in many churches.
Right.
There are a lot of churches where there is no value. So again, let's go back and tackle this again. So go back to the central issue that starts this whole thing, which is the attitude of a Gen Xer or a Gen Z, or sorry, I keep saying Gen X, millennial or a Gen Zer. You said, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't want to take your words out of context. The desire to be a difference maker comes from a selfish viewpoint as opposed to I just want to help other people. It's more of I want to help other people so that I'm seen helping other people. Is that fair?
Right, but that's a blanket statement, right? That's not true for everybody.
No. But that's what you were intimating. Okay.
Yep.
Would you say that dovetails into the idea of the virtue signal or the, you know, I want to protest, doesn't matter what you're protesting, because I want to make a difference so that I can feel good about myself. I can be seen making that difference.
Sorry, the coffee kind of got me there.
That's okay.
Yeah, and if it's not that, it's because everybody else is doing it, and they really don't have any idea what they're really putting value into. Because I mean, they are placing value in how they're acting, right, and how they're responding to whatever's happening culturally. And we can ask that group if they feel valued, and they're going to say no, we don't feel valued. But at the same time, they're the ones that are putting all of this value into taking a stand and making a march, making a protest, or, you know, going down those roads. So they're placing value, but they don't really understand the value that they're placing.
Would you agree that the millennial or the Gen Zer, their idea of being valued, or for them to feel valued in many circumstances, again, this is not, we are trying to be very careful here to say we're not blanket stating every kid, but generally speaking, would them being valued mean that we're doing what they ask us to do?
Yeah.
Whereas in previous generations, that may not have been the case. They just wanted to know you're hearing them, that you're listening.
Right. There used to be a day where you could like disagree, right? Or you would hear conversations around, hey, thanks for listening to what I had to say. Whether you agreed with them or not, it was, hey, thank you for listening to what I had to say. I mean, I know you heard what I said. Or we had conversations from a leadership standpoint to say, hey, I hear what you say. I heard you just say. I mean, those are some of the phrases that we would use. Or if you say that today, you know, to different age groups, they'll be like, well, that's not what I meant. It's what I said, but it's not what I meant. Or, well, that's not really what I meant to say. So, I mean, there is this shift. I mean, you can look at senior adults in this whole idea of value. And if you're a senior adult today watching, one thing that your pastors hear is that you're not valued. And I ask you, do you feel valued by your church? And it always comes back, well, it's not always. A lot of times it comes back and no, I don't really feel valued. Well, why is that? Well, it's because, one, we don't have a senior adult pastor. If you really cared for us, you'd have a senior adult pastor.
Right.
If you really cared for us, you would have somebody else come alongside us and lead the ministries that we've been leading for, 1,000 years. And it's not that. It's that's a hard conversation to have, because what we do intentionally, at least for Hermnaz, intentionally to help our seniors feel valued, while at the same time have our young ones feel valued. And I can go to the young ones I can go to our students and say, before you got here, and say, hey, do you feel like your church values you? And they would, I mean, resoundingly around the circle, or like, yeah, no. And I mean, quote, unquote, nobody around here listens to us. I mean, nobody. I'm like, really? Nobody listens to you? No, I was new here then, right? So I didn't understand. I was just kind of researching, and yeah, come to find out, no, they weren't part of anything in the church. Well, at the same time, the senior adult group is not feeling valued because, well, they're not getting the attention paid to them. Everybody's focused on the young families, the families with kids, and so in the church world, it's a mess. Value is a mess. But we got to come back to, there is value. We have value. And where's the value come from? Who places value? We don't place value. I mean, we look at Scripture. Scripture places value on us. And it doesn't matter, Christian, non-Christian. If you're sucking air, God put value on you. So what we do with the value and how we view it is different. And that's what we're talking about with the different age groups. But I mean, it is different. So
it's not to say that being valued isn't important. I mean, everybody wants to be valued. I think across the board, doesn't matter your age. I think that's what you're trying to say here, is that everybody wants to be valued. However, I do think,
but it looks different.
And I think there is I think it's very easy for us to get very selfish in what it means to be valued.
I think I just said that.
Yes, I'm trying to.
Yeah, okay.
Because
I was just checking.
Yeah. Whether it is having a senior adult pastor or a kids pastor or a worship pastor or a youth pastor or whatever, that doesn't mean that your ministry is or is not valued. You could have a youth pastor and your student ministry still not be valued. You could have a senior adult pastor and your senior adult ministry, senior adults, not be valued. Value should not be determined by whether you have a leader over a ministry area in your church. That doesn't necessarily mean anything. I think you take the whole picture. How are resources being allocated? I would argue that we should never be worried about whether I'm being fed. There should never be the question, what is being done for me? That is the wrong question to always be asking. And I think when, again, getting back to the central theme here today, when older generations, I would say 35 plus in the church, generally speaking, which I fall into now. I find out I'm not a young adult anymore.
You're over the hill.
Yeah, one of our newer people in our church said that it's 35
and younger.
Yep. And I was like, I'm not young anymore.
Yep, you got slapped.
Yeah. But I think when our generation looks at the younger generations, we see a lot of selfishness. We see a lot of self-centeredness. But the reality is there's self-centeredness on our side too, which, again, you so eloquently elaborated to. So here's the next question I have for you then. If we have this wrong sense of value, how do we begin to value students and children in a healthy context within the church while not alienating other generations?
Yeah, if you have an answer to that question, please let us know. I mean, really. I mean, it's almost like you take the old church mentality of taking the shotgun approach, right? You want to make sure everybody's got what they need and everything is important. I mean, there's always the battle between children's ministry and youth ministry and senior adult ministry and young adult ministry, worship versus, I mean, I don't know, do you guys have a war between anybody? I don't think worship actually fights against anybody.
No, we just fight internally on what type of songs we need to play or what type of music to do.
Yeah, but I think you have to meet the needs of the people that you have, and those needs change. They really change. I mean, you look at the life of our own church, and from even 2 years ago, the people that are here, their needs have changed. So even go
well, people have changed.
Yeah, people have changed. But let's go pre-pandemic, right? Yearly, people and the needs of the church change. So we have to just be mindful in that change. I did a horrible job answering your question, but I don't think you can just take a one bullet shot. I think you do have to take the shotgun approach, because you want to have a well-rounded ministry. And if we're not asking the question, do you feel valued? And we actually sit back and listen, we're probably not going to move off our spot.
Yeah, and I think too, there's also the aspect of, do you value other ministry areas? Do you value other age groups? Like, how are you personally?
Yep.
You know, if you're watching this right now and you're a part of a church, you're a layperson, specifically, you need to ask yourself that question: am I valuing? If, let's say, you're a senior adult, am I valuing student ministry? And that doesn't mean just throwing your dollars at student ministry. I mean, look, as a youth pastor, I always appreciate when adults of all ages are helping support students going to camps, retreats, events, whatever. That's great. It's important, and that we ask for that money for a reason. However, that's not the only evidence that you value the student ministry. Do you pray for the student ministry? Do you actively pray for our students? Are you wanting to get involved in, cooking and, being a part of events? Even if you're not a direct life group leader or something, you can be involved in the student ministry. Have you taken that step? Even if you're not in our church here at Hermnaz, have you taken the time to talk to your youth pastor or whoever's the lay leader in charge of your student ministry? Have you asked them how you can help?
So you can take everything that you just said, right? And you can put that in any ministry.
Correct.
Single moms, single parents, dads, divorced, Celebrate Recovery.
Well, in single parents you bring up, that's another area beyond the kids and the teens. I would guess in most churches, if you ask single parents if they feel valued, the answer is probably going to be no.
Yeah.
Because they are, I mean, at least all the single parents, or most of the single parents that I've known in my ministry, and I would venture a guess you're in the same boat, their life is hard. Really hard. I mean, I know being a dad of two girls and having my wife, I can't imagine trying to do it by myself. It's hard enough.
I can't imagine you doing it by yourself.
Oh, dude, it would be a train wreck. I mean, I'm sure I would figure it out. I mean, I think that all single parents figure out how to make things work. Right. Certainly not to the extent that they would want it to.
Right.
But I just, there are so many, and you're right, that same formula works for all ministry areas. But then, if you're a pastor, I think there's two questions you need to be asking yourself. Where are your resources going? Because I think your resources as a church, how you're stewarding the money, really does speak to what you care about as a church, what value, because, you're putting a monetary value on things, right? So if you're spending an outsized amount of money on one ministry area versus others, that's telling you something. You're spending an outsized amount of money on a particular ministry area. You have to ask yourself the question, who's coming to know Jesus? Because that should be the main focus of any church, right? I mean, our mission should be the lost being found. So if, statistically speaking, 95% of new converts, which Barna researched this a few years ago and said 95% of new converts in the church at the time, I think this is 2015, 2014, something like that, are between the ages of 8 and 30. Well, if you have a senior adult who says, you're focusing too much on young families, well, there's a reason for that.
Right.
95% of new converts in the church are in that age group.
I think you also have to add in there the discipleship training, because you're going to spend money. I mean, you're going to spend money heavy in different areas at different times, especially if you're shotgun approaching, placing value, right? Because, in the life of different age groups, there's seasons.
Well, we look at even worship ministry. We spend more money at Easter and Christmas than we do in the summer. Right.
So, but the training comes from the heart, right? You got to train the heart on, hey, value. What's the value of that ministry? Sure, we can throw money at it and we can throw all that, but the best way for somebody to test their heart on if they value somebody else's ministry, which is what you're asking, is get off your hiney and show up.
Right.
Right. Come to a senior. If you're like a young adult and you're like, yeah, they just place so much time on senior adults. Well, show up.
Right.
Come to something. you're probably gonna be bored to death. I mean, in all honesty, because it's just not you. It's not your age group. But you're gonna get a glimpse of why there's value there, right?
Well, and you might also see a reaction you're not expecting. Like you may be expecting that you're not going to fit in, that they're not going to want you around. You're probably going to find out that it's actually
It's
the
just
opposite.
the opposite.
They're going to be like, thankfully, somebody cares enough to
Yeah.
show up at our event. And the same is true if a senior adult shows up at a kid's thing.
Yeah.
It matters to a young kid when a senior adult shows up. And in the same way, if a teenager shows up at, or a young adult shows up at a senior adult event, like, we have Liberty Quartet that comes in. That is specifically...
Yeah, November
and-
6th, I think.
Yeah, almost entirely geared towards adults. Like that is not... I mean, I don't think we would ever advertise it for kids. Like it's not for kids. However, when kids, teens, young adults come to the Liberty Quartet, because it's actually... I was mildly entertained last year as somebody who's not into that style of music and stuff, but... if you like Southern Gospel, again, November 6th. It's a Sunday night, I think, right?
I think so.
So you may find, that's not half bad. And again, the senior adults who will be there in large numbers, because, I mean, last year's any evidence for us, it was predominantly senior adults. They will look around the room. They'll see you there worshiping and enjoying yourself, and that will bless their heart. They
Yeah.
will feel like you actually value the
So let's
same
just
thing
flip
they
that,
do.
though. When we had George Moss here, we had senior adults come to the hip-hop concert. Mm-hmm. And some sat there, some stood there, some actually got a little groove, thing going. Or as I would say, got a little G-fly happening there. I love that. But listen, if you show up, you're going to feel valued because they're going to want help with their cell phones,
Yeah.
right? They're going to want you to, hey, can
you take a picture?
can you show me what to do here? So you're going to feel valued, right? At that, but for you, that's like every day. Like seriously, no. Listen, that's the heart change. It's like no, you are investing in that person that needs help, right? You're investing in that. So show up, and help.
And you'll be amazed at what happens in your church when you begin to live this way as a church. When you begin to, again, the buzzword intergenerational ministry, whatever, but just live life authentically with each other. Like, care about what the other person cares about.
So as we get close to the end here, I think there's reasons, and we haven't talked about reasons for not feeling valued in culture. So if I just look at the student generations, right? Who gives them the time of day? I mean, really, schools don't. Teachers are just there to, and I know I'm going to hear from the educators on this, but a lot of teachers, you put your time in the classroom, and hey, I love teaching, I love students, but man, beyond that classroom, 55 minutes, you're pretty much done. Very few teachers meet after school, before school, tutoring. Now, again, this is blanket, so don't come at me saying I'm down on teachers and educators. That's not what I'm saying. But reality is the students that we work with, teachers don't give them the time of day. Counselors don't give them the time of day. Employers, they give you maybe one chance unless you look different. They don't really give you the time of day. The adult world, the criminal system, they don't give you the time. There's no value in you. You're guilty unless you're proven innocent instead of the other way around. Our culture doesn't really give them time. We always think the worst. When anything happens in culture, it's always the teenager, it's always the young person, right? We don't give them the time of day.
We always assume the worst has happened.
And that infiltrates the church, which it should, because the church should be filled with people who live in everyday culture, right? But the difference is you've got to have Christ at the center of that and let him formulate, right, our hearts when it comes to value. So I guess I'm just throwing that out there because I know it does a real big heart check when you start looking at things from somebody else's perspective, like from a student's perspective. Ask a student, hey, do you feel valued by your school? And listen. I mean, I challenge every teacher to ask a student that, and not your pet student, right? Not the one that you invest a whole lot of time in. Pick the one that doesn't say anything in class.
The one who's much harder to invest in, because even in
Yeah.
student ministry, there's usually one, maybe two, maybe three, depending on how big your youth group is, of the kid that's
Yeah, right. It's that
difficult.
the challenge. I mean, just ask them. But even as pastors, if there's any of you listening, I double dog challenge you. Ask your people, hey, do you feel valued by your church? And don't take it as a reflection of you and your leadership. You have to be bigger than that. You have to be big enough to just ask the question and listen, and then correct what you can as a church. Lead where you can lead. Because you can't fix it all. That's not what our calling is as a pastor. We are not fixers of like hardly anything, right? We're just the presenters.
We're shepherds.
And well, some are, but I think all of us are called to present, right? Some can present and they're not shepherds. They strictly are
That's a good point.
Strictly they're teachers, right?
Right.
I mean, the word says some can teach and some can't. So we're all called to present, though. So ask the question, present, and listen. If you're part of a church and they're not asking that question, and maybe it's even Herb Naz, you don't feel like Herb Naz is asking you, come to us and say, hey, you know what? I don't feel very valued. But when you ask the question, be ready for the questions to come back at you, because there could be questions like, well, why don't you feel valued?
Yeah.
Like
There'll
what
be
are you participating in?
Challenging questions.
Yeah. Like what are you doing to make yourself feel valued? How are you jumping into ministry? Where are you reading in the Word? And how are you praying? And what are the other groups and people you're praying for? I mean, so you can come and ask and say, hey, I don't really feel valued. We'll help you with that, but it's going to be by way of probably some hard questions. And they're only hard questions, I'll speak for myself, is because I've had to live through that. I had to live through being asked the hard questions, because I was a squirrely teenager. I was a squirrely young adult. I was probably a failure as a young adult in many ways in my church life. And I had people around me, slap me in the back of the head sometimes and ask me some hard questions. And I'd walk away going like, see, they don't value my opinion. There was a selfish part right there, right? It was my opinion. And really what it was training, going like, oh, yeah, which I didn't get until later on in life. So
Sometimes the hard questions are what need to be asked. I mean, Jesus
Yeah.
certainly didn't shy away from rebuking and asking tough questions of his people.
Man, wait until this Sunday.
Yeah, no kidding.
Wow. Pergama. That's the church we're talking about.
Yeah, and I would also just, add to what you just said, and saying that, pastors, we put so much pressure on ourselves oftentimes to make our churches rather perfection, like perfect examples. And look, we're never going to be perfect examples. Our churches are always going to be dysfunctional in some sense.
Herb Naz is perfect.
No.
I think we're pretty. We're
We're
good.
great, but perfect, I don't think so.
That's why you're staff and I'm the pastor.
That's fine.
I'm proud of you.
But it's okay. It's okay to not be perfect. It's okay to pursue. Yep. Our job is to pursue perfection. And so, where we see an area of some improvement that's needed, go after it. Don't shy away from it. Don't be afraid. And I think that's what it really comes down to. The reason those questions are not being asked is fear. It's fear of, again, the reflection on us as pastors. Because you're opening Pandora's box, as soon as you start asking those questions, then the questions very easily can be turned back on the pastor. Well, what are you doing as a pastor? So maybe as a pastor, the first step for you is a time of reflection for yourself and saying, okay, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, the old SWOT analysis. What are we doing? What are we not doing? What should we be doing? What can we be doing?
Yeah, or just get rid of Pandora's box. Like I don't have a Pandora's box anymore. I mean, I don't. I mean, that's not a philosophy I live by. If I got something to say, I'm going to say it. I'm going to ask it. But I've been around ministry long enough to take some lumps, right?
Sure.
So maybe there's somebody out there that hasn't taken lumps in ministry, and maybe you are in fear of this Pandora's box. But Jesus took care of Pandora a long time ago.
Yeah, I mean, again, the fear has no place in ministry. It certainly has no place in the Christian life. That's over and over again in the Scripture.
I didn't say I don't have fear.
I mean, we can get afraid. I mean, we do get afraid, but again, that fear cannot override what Christ wants us to do as leaders. And again, to get back to us as individuals, go back to what we said at the beginning. Ask yourself, how do I value other people? If you don't feel valued, ask how you value others within the church body, and also ask, what are you doing? Ask yourself what you're doing.
And maybe you're not part of a church, and you're asking yourself, man, why don't I feel like anybody values me in this world? The same questions go for you. How do you value other people? What can you do to involve yourself in somebody else's life? How can you invest in somebody else's life? We're going to say, invest your life in Christ, because that's where we find value. I mean, ultimately, that's our value. That's where we get it. That's where we have our foundation. And I think today's whole thing goes back to the simple verse that everybody knows. You see it in every baseball game, every sports arena. You see the wild guy standing up there with John 3:16, right? Either painted in paint, body paint, T-shirts, banners, flags, whatever. But the value is that Jesus says, you are so stinking important. I love you so much that I gave you life. I gave you breath. I gave you plans of purpose. I gave you a vision. I've told you I'm not going to, let you just drift and drown. I'm going to take care of you because I value you. I know you have value. So you have to reach out to that. And I know we picked the most popular verse of of Scripture besides Jesus wept, maybe. But to be able to say, listen, I loved you so much. I gave everything I had because that's value.
Right.
I can't think of very many things that I've ever purchased in life that I've given everything for. I've only bought one brand new car with 0 miles on it. We gave way more than we should have gave, but we gave everything, right, that we had at that time. And then our houses. We've owned several houses, and even though we haven't given everything, we live within our means, but man, it sure feels like you give everything when you make that initial down payment on a house. And it takes a little while to kind of get over the fear of what did I just do? Well, I gave everything that I could give, so I could afford what I have, and that's what Jesus did. He gave everything he could give, so that you would turn around and give your life back to him and go, that's what you died for, Christ. Thank you for that. So that's all I got.
So just as some
love you.
Housekeeping pieces, we have a series that we're doing right now called The 7 Letters, and we're talking about revival. Our church has been in the midst of a revival for 3 weeks now, going on our 4th week, and we want you to get engaged. If you're a Hermanaz person, or if you're here in Umatilla County or Morrow County, you are more than welcome. Sundays, 10:30 a.m. here at Hermiston Nazarene Church. We thank our board and our leadership for giving us the ability to put on the show and sponsoring it every week. And then also, we started a new thing a couple weeks ago called Encounter on Sunday nights at 5:30 p.m.
Yep. Just for the time of 7 Letters, just for the series.
And it's a time of worship, reflection, prayer, testimony. And starting this week, we start having some guest speakers.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yep.
So come and be a part of hearing some other perspectives on revival and personal revival. And the question that we've been asking over and over again is, what is it going to take for you to have personal revival? What are you going to need to make that happen? And so ask yourself that question. And again, if you have no church home, you're more than welcome to be part of our church family. And even if you have a church home but you don't do anything on Sunday nights and you just want time to worship, pray, and reflect, you're more than welcome to come and be a part of our Sunday night thing for as long as we're doing it here in this series. And just connect with Jesus. It's a great time, and I'm just glad to be a part of it. So
Yep, me too.
Thanks for joining us today on the Morning Burrito. We will be back next week, 10 a.m. on Tuesday.